The prototype pattern isn't about creating prototypes of games or apps, rather it is about creating copies of already existing objects. This can be especially useful when you have a larger, more complicated object with tons of variables and you just want to duplicate it along with all of the values that the variables have. This can be useful, for example, when you have some save system and you want to allow the players to copy these saves. Or in some kind of builder game, you may want to allow them to copy certain buildings, so they don't have to go through all these settings again. And there are tons more use cases for this pattern, so let's dive straight into the first example, which will be the save system. I've already created two simple scripts. The first one is game data and the other one is game data manager. In the game data script, we are just storing all the information related to the game save. In this case, I have a player level, difficulty, and some player equipment, which is its own class. They have just simple constructors, and in case of the game data, we are inputting only the difficulty, because that's probably the only thing that the player is going to choose. The player level is going to be on 0 from default, and the same way the player probably shouldn't have any equipment. And in the game data manager, we just have a list of these game datas. On update, I'm checking if you are pressing the left mouse button. If we are, then we are going to duplicate the last game save that there is. And how we could definitely do it is just to say new game data, and we could pass in the difficulty like this, and then we would also need to set the player level and the player equipment. This would work fine in case when you need to duplicate the game data only in one place, but still there would be quite a lot of code, and it wouldn't work well when some of the variables would be private. In that case, we simply cannot access them. So to do that, you would typically create new constructor, which would take in all of the values that you need. And this type of constructor that we will be creating is called a copy constructor. For copy constructors, you will most likely be inputting the object you want to duplicate. So in this case, we are inputting another game data. And as I mentioned, we can use the other constructor we have. So we are going to call this constructor. We can pass in the difficulty from the other object. And then we can do all of the other setup as usual. So I'm going to set the player level. And now, what are we going to do with the player equipment? We could definitely set it the same way, so player equipment is equal to other.player equipment. But in this case, the player equipment is a list storing some objects. And because objects are reference types, if we would set it this way, we would only be setting the references to the same objects. This would mean that if we would change the equipment of one of the game datas, it would also automatically change on all of the other game datas, because they would be simply referencing the same objects. We call these objects that only share the reference to the same objects shallow copies, because they are not really copied in depth. On the other hand, we have deep copies, which create new instances of all of the objects that the class is holding. So in this case, we cannot do it simply like this. Instead, we are going to loop through all of the equipment that we have in the list, and we are going to create new equipment objects based on that. And because later we may add many more variables inside of the equipment class, I'm also going to create copy constructor for it. And then when we are creating the deep copy of the game data, we are just looping through the equipment and adding the new equipment, where we are again creating a duplicate of the equipment. And finally, in the game data manager, we are going to add new game data into the list, and we are going to pass in the game data that we want to copy. I've added the game data manager onto an empty object. You can see that I've already set up one save, and when I left click, you will see it's going to create copy of it. And because it is deep copy, I can change name of the first equipment we have to, let's say, a helmet, and I can also remove the second one. And now when I create another copy of this element, you will see again it has all of the same properties. Again, I can try to change the name and so on. So yeah, we can see that everything is working as it should. And if you would add a little bit more UI, some buttons, then this could be a really nice system to have in your own game. And if you like this video and you found it useful, I would be really grateful if you would consider liking, subscribing, commenting, sharing it with other people. It's going to help me a lot, so thank you. Let's now take a look at another more complete example, which could be used in a builder game, where you can build houses, you can upgrade them, and you may also want to copy the existing houses with all of the existing upgrades. So for this, again, I have just two scripts. We have the house script and the house upgrader. First, let's take a look at the house. We have just some variables related to the level of the walls, level of the roof, then parents of both of these visuals. Because when you take a look into Unity, you can see that I have the house object. Under it, I have those two parents, the roof, the walls, and under each one of those, I have multiple levels. So we can simply enable and disable the game objects. Then we have the prefab, the maximum level for the walls, for the roof. On start, I'm just assigning those two parents. Then I have a function to update the house part, into which I can pass in the parent, where all the house parts are stored. And then I can pass in the level. You can see that when we are updating the house part, I'm disabling all of the house parts and then enabling only the one that we need. And then we have those two really simple functions to upgrade the walls and upgrade the roof. And finally, in the house upgrader script, we are connecting it all together. So first we are checking if there is a house, I'm doing a raycast, and then we are either upgrading the house, if I press the left mouse button or the right mouse button, it's just upgrading a different part, and we are also cloning the house if I press D. In this case, we cannot clone the house straight away as we could have done it for the game save, because we cannot simply say new house, since many of the variables, in fact all of the variables are private, so we wouldn't be able to pass them in. So for this reason we have to use the prototype pattern. And it's going to work almost the same way, except in this case we are using a MonoBehaviour class, so we cannot instantiate it using a constructor. Instead, I'm just going to create a public clone method that's going to return the house. For this, we don't need any parameters, because we'll already be calling the function on the object we want to duplicate. So I'm just instantiating the house prefab, getting the house component, and we'll also need to somehow set all of the variables on it. I'm going to create an initialize function. This one can be private because we'll be calling it just from here. So on the house we are going to say initialize, and this is really just setting all of the variables that we need. In this case, we don't have to worry about creating deep or shallow copy of the object, even though there are some reference type variables like these parents, but these are being initialized on start, and this is it. So you can see that using the prototype pattern for MonoBehaviour classes is also pretty straightforward. So now we can use that in the house upgrader. So we can simply call the clone function on the house we want to clone, then we get the new house, and I'm just offsetting the position by a bit so it's not at the same position, so you can actually see something. So let's check it in Unity. I have already added the house with the house script, with the house upgrader component, all of that. So now when I left click the house, we can see we are upgrading the walls. When I right click, it's going to upgrade the roof, and when I press D, you can see it creates a copy of it. I can create a copy of any one of those. Let's say of this one, I upgrade it, copy it again. You can see all the stats of the house have been copied. We can upgrade them independently, and everything seems to work. This way is definitely going to be a much more pleasant experience for the players of your game, if they constantly don't have to be going through all of the upgrades, and they can simply copy the already existing leveled houses. So what do you think about this pattern? Do you find it useful? Do you use it often? Or do you think that there is a better way to handle the duplication of the objects? In any case, you can let me know down in the comments. There are also two other ways how we can use the prototype pattern in Unity, and I think that you are already using both of them. The first one is using prefabs, because that really allows you to save the state of the object into some asset, and then you can simply instantiate it at any point you want, and it's always going to have the same data. And the second way of using the prototype pattern in Unity is using scriptable objects, because again those are some data containers which store some data and you can always copy it somewhere else. And there is one more built-in way how you can use the prototype pattern with C#, which is using the iClonable interface, which is stored in system. So this is the interface, iClonable. It's really trivial, it has just one function, that's the only thing that you need, the clone function. But to be honest, I never really use this. There are two reasons. First, that this function returns an object, so in case that you use it, you need to do a lot of casting, so you actually get the required type that you need to get from it. And also this interface is kind of general, you don't really know if it's going to create the shallow clone or the deep clone. So for this, it may be worth it to create your own interfaces. Let's say the iDeep clonable, iShallow clonable, and maybe also create generic versions of it. That would also be much better, I think. But anyways, you should know that there already is a built-in way to do this. Anyways, this is it from me for today, so down in the comments, let me know what other design patterns you would want to see on this channel. I hope that this video was useful. If you have any questions or suggestions, you can also let me know down in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and I will see you in next videos. Bye!